Dillon, Monroe, The Rest of Humanity, Bear Corp, November 7th, 2246. A Searcher's Perspective. The world has been a dark place for the last 6.5 years. And there's nothing we can do but live in the ruins of civilization left behind from the destruction of the undead hordes we all contend with on a daily basis. However, this doesn't mean that life is now entirely hopeless, because it isn't. And I can tell you about it either to convince you that the world has some optimism if you're unaware, or merely to inform you of what goes on in Bear City. This report will detail 3 chapters, recounting everything from my perspective through introductions, history, and my unique position in Bear City, which would raise red flags if you're a college professor from 6 years ago. But the fact is, there's no other way for me to tell you outside of what I have in mind, given that there's no way to cite new events due to the complete absence of actual new historical material recounting the past half-decade, since survival is more important. And I have no idea how to write a proper report outside of what I know from my college years. Another thing to mention is that .com news articles do not count usually, since you're taught to be discouraged from using them and go with .org or .edu sources in their place, which of course have nothing new these days. The only form of history now is through our own words, said to one another in person. Journals hoping to be put in a future history book, or internet articles recounting their perspective of events via first-hand accounts or thorough interviews directly quoting our physical words, or paraphrasing it if they want to edit parts out to make it shorter. Maybe one day we'll have that privilege of using citations and being able to make normal MLA papers again in the new world. But for now, it's only me here, and what I've seen. And I hope you can be open to new suggestions of recounting history for now, instead of being locked to past rules trying to describe a world with walking corpses that used to be our friends and family. Let's start with the obvious, being that my name is Dillon Monroe, and I am currently a security officer for Bear Corp at the age of 35, and by extension of being a Bear Corp SO, I'm also a searcher. My place in this city started about 5 years ago, when I went from being a solo street-smart survivor to being an ordinary citizen when I was found by various searchers when exploring what is known as the Dead City. I'll explain these terms shortly, but anyway, I was escorted to their headquarters where I was given a nice room to sleep in after having the best meal I've had in a long while, before being sent into Bear City via a train that goes from the Searcher HQ all the way to Searcher Station within the city itself, where then I was made a citizen shortly after getting a mental health evaluation. I was then given my own apartment, which I still live in to this day because I like small cozy places, and I was given time to myself for 3 months, given how I was at the time, which allowed me to adjust to the city before I had to go to work once the break ended. Here's a photo from me looking out the window, taken 2 months into my stay, which is nice, and still is. When asked what job I wanted to head into, given how there were plenty of options available, I chose to be security for Bear Corp, given my college background of law enforcement programs, since I wanted to be a cop back in those days, and so I did what I did best for a year. Then, out of the blue, I was selected to take on a searcher job, which I completely forgot about at the time, which made me pay attention to how the city got its resources in one way and took care of itself. You might ask me why I didn't pay attention to such things like that within 1 year. But I'll ask you this. Imagine surviving for a long time in the apocalypse by yourself, and you happen to be lucky enough to be welcomed into a city that resembles ordinary life. Would you pay attention to how the city functioned in the current mental state you're in? The answer would be no, if you actually care about yourself. Over the course of the 5 years I've been in Bear City, I grew to become more and more of a protector of the city, the Bear Corp itself, and the people around me. I've also explored the dead city and got into a handful of situations in my job as a searcher where operations can go well or become completely and utterly foobar. Fucked up beyond all recognition. But what's surprising to this very day is that on my first day as a searcher, everything ultimately ended up where I found myself meeting the CEO of Bear Corp himself, named Warren Bear, which led to me becoming part of his personal security detail as the years passed by, which I will explain in full later. Nowadays, when I'm not working, I spend my time watching films like Blade Runner with my husband, who I've been married to for 3 months now, going out with both my friends and work friends, reading Alex Cross books whenever I'm in the mood to, and been going to therapy with my hubby alongside me during those, which isn't as bad as you'd think they are. So, now that you know me pretty well, I can move on to the history of Bear City itself, which I'm sure you've had plenty of questions about, as I mentioned various terms such as the dead city, searcher, you name it, and I'll explain them. Bear City is a massive city located in North Dakota, built by the conglomerate known as Bear Corp, who, before the apocalypse, were known to specialize in both urban and city development, and so they decided about 10 years ago to start building Bear City in the middle of a big plot of land. After 4 years of building, the undead nightmare began to take over the world, which led to Warren Bear being at a crossroads. Either finish building the city and build a wall around it, or build a wall around finished parts of the city and abandon the rest. Warren chose the second option, and what you see here from a photo by Warren himself via drone is what Bear City looks like today alongside what's known as the Dead City outside of the wall. The operation to secure the city wasn't easy, but it was necessary where the entirety of the Bear Corp security detail, along with thousands of civilian volunteers, took part in what is now known among the company and the entire city pretty much as Operation Home, where the company and the people at their disposal kept the city safe by going into the dead city to hold off the undead as long as they could, while others built the wall surrounding the city over the course of 4 months. Yes, they built the wall in 4 fucking months. I had to do a double take as well, given how insane of a task this was to pull off. I don't know how many were killed, and I don't want to, but Operation Home was accomplished, and is the foundation for what the city is today. As for how the city operates, it's quite simple. It functions like a walled-in society where you can live a normal life with 0 strings attached other than having to get a job once you're of age, so the city can still sustain itself. If you're someone who doesn't want to work for Bear Corp security or be a searcher, you can live a normal life within the city walls, and you can leave the city if you want to take your chances for any reason. In my 5 years of being a part of this city, I can assure you that Bear Corp actually cares about the citizens in Bear City. And even the searchers, it has working with them. And I know this would sound like I'm biased given how I'm employed by them, but I have a moral compass that is not to be fucked with. If stuff was shady, I would have left the city long ago, and the Corp wouldn't have any issues with a possible resignation, so believe me when I say that they're good. As for why the company is called Bear Corp, it's due to the company's founder from 200 years ago, believing in the teddy bear folklore, where teddy bears would come to life and protect you in the middle of the night from the monsters in the dark. And the founder, who's named Trevor, decided to change his last name to Bear due to his moral values being the same as the teddy bears, which is to look after those close to him. Afterward, the rest was history, where now, the current CEO has his name from the very same teddy bear Trevor had throughout his life, and the teddy bear himself is proudly displayed on Bear Tower, seen here from a drone. Some might ask, why would Trevor go into city development instead of something like security or whatnot? I don't know much about city development and haven't paid attention to these steps of things back in the day. But knowing Warren, I'd say that the process leads to more places for people to get on their feet, such as mental health resources or job resources or whatever is out there. That is the case here in Bear City, but back then, I'm not sure if it was the case or not, other than having Warren's word to go off of, with him saying that it was. Overall, Bear City lives as a safe haven for 1.7 million people who all live normal, ordinary lives, or at least somewhat ordinary if you're security or a searcher. But you can enjoy life with many prospects such as fiction writing, carpentry, package delivery, taxi, filmmaker, teddy bear builder, you name it. However, if you want to work in Bear Corp security, then you'd have the random chance of becoming a searcher. I'll explain this in the perspective of if you're a Bear Corp SO, which is a lot easier, and would also explain if you wish to go into the other job as well. Killing two birds with one stone, as they'd say. So, if you're working as a Bear Corp SO, you are told directly to your face that if you take this job, you are legally obligated to become a searcher, who is a person who goes outside of Bear City and explores the outside world to bring back resources, so the city is prepared in case it can't sustain itself on its own for some time. Searchers mainly explore the dead city, given how, during the construction of Bear City, nobody knew that the undead would show up, so plenty of buildings were already loaded with resources before Warren made the decision to build the wall. Thankfully, with the preservatives systems in place in those buildings, we don't have to be in a rush to get all the food in those buildings, since they're already preserved and have been for the past 6 years. If you're wondering, yes, the Dead City's power remains on, with the purpose of the preservatives alongside helping the searchers get by if they need any lights when going inside of buildings at night, rather than wasting flashlight power. But the key is that you have to turn off whatever lights you use once you're done using them, so the city doesn't draw too much power. More power means more resources drained out from the solar energy and the electric generators. So if a searcher happens to, say, get in a snag and had to leave behind a building's lights on to save themselves, another operation would happen from another group to turn off the lights and return home. You can also willingly become a searcher by heading over to Searcher Station and registering your name, but the result is ultimately the same. So, now that you know what a searcher is, I'll tell you my first day on the job to explain what the life of a searcher is, which leads us to the final section of this report. On my first day, I had a knock on my door, which turned out to be my security partner Cole Scott, who told me that both me and him were selected for a searcher operation. I was confused at first and asked him, "What the hell is a searcher?" Which he said, "It's where you go outside the walls and loot the dead city. Every SO is legally required to do this and is told this when you signed up." You remember being told this when you signed up? I told him no, and he got me up to speed before we both ultimately found ourselves at Searcher Station, which I also have a photo for, thanks to Warren once again, alongside all the photos up ahead. So, give him thanks if able. When we found ourselves at Searcher Station, we were told that we'd be meeting up with a crew at the Searcher HQ named Searcher Tower, and we'd be given our set equipment for the job, and after getting seated on the very same train that brought me into the city a year prior, we were off towards the dead city. Once the long train ride came to a stop, we arrived at the Searcher Tower, which was comprised of 2 towers named T1 and T2, featuring a micro-society of active searchers living there, either to keep the tower safe from the undead, or to be ready at a moment's notice for future operations. As for why they decided to take a building made up of 2 towers side by side, it's in the event of if one of the towers was to be taken over by the undead, the searchers can evacuate everyone into the other tower and plan on an emergency cleanup operation. That way, they don't have to run to another building and risk putting themselves in further danger. If you're wondering why the dead city's building lights are illuminated, it's the emergency lights left on so delivery rovers, or flying cars if you want to call them that, can see the city at night and don't have any risk of crashing into it. The city usually has plenty of rovers that arrive in the city to bring resources, join the population, etc., since the world is very much in agreement that working together to live in this new world is best suited instead of holding hostilities. After the train doors opened, a searcher named Haley Cavanaugh escorted us to our crew, located on T1, and during the escort, I asked her why me and Cole were needed if there were plenty of searchers around. And she replied with, "These guys here are ready for an emergency rescue op if needed, while others are here to protect the tower." A big group of 150 searchers went beyond the dead city to explore the world after hearing rumors from the tower radio to see what they can bring back, while 2 groups of 10 in the dead city are missing. We already sent out a crew of 10 to find them with Bear Corp SOs while also collecting resources along the way, but then they went missing too. And the worst part is all of their radios aren't working, so we're sending you in. As she finished her sentence, we arrived in a room with 4 other searchers looking directly at the door once we entered. They wore black clothing with holstered suppressed pistols, sat around a circular table playing Uno with backpacks hanging off the back of their chairs, and had suppressed rifles leaning against the table. I remember all of them, except for Amanda, saying, "Oh hey, welcome to the after party." Aside from Cole, who has dark skin and always has a sense of sincerity through his expressions, I don't remember the searchers' faces, but I do remember their names. The 4 searchers were named Moira, Vincent, Taylor, and Amanda. 3 of them were women, while the 1 male of the group was Vincent. We were briefly introduced and then informed on what we had to do. Our objective is to find the missing 30, loot anything valuable along the way, and get back home safe. While all of us were gearing up with suppressed weapons, holsters, flare guns, alongside normal flare sticks, radios, and large backpacks, I was asked if I shot a gun before, which I remember my answer very well, with it being I've lived in the wild for 5 years straight, and went to college courses on law enforcement to become a cop before everything went to shit. So yes, I know them all very well. So afterward, we went down an elevator and found ourselves on the streets of the dead city, and I believe this image does it more justice than any words I could type into this report. Simply put, we walked around the city in stealth, taking out various undead with our suppressed weapons along the way, and collecting whatever valuable stuff we could find. I don't remember what we found, because it's been 4 years since all of this happened, and when I remember all of this, the stuff we found doesn't matter compared to how everything ended up. After searching for 12 hours straight, and a few breaks in between as we were halfway a quarter of the way through Dead City, looking for the missing 30 by any means without compromising ourselves to the undead, Taylor thought it would be a good idea to head to the top of a skyscraper and shoot a flare to see if anyone responds in the event they happen to miss out on us flickering light switches in buildings as a form of Morse code, or us yelling out names in buildings we knew for sure we could do that in without alerting the outside. Of course, some were skeptical of the idea, like Vincent, for example, who thought that the undead would notice, but suggested the idea that if we noticed someone through their reactions to the flare shot, that we could call an extractor to pick us up and take us to the person who noticed. Pick up that person, or people if multiple noticed, and get the fuck out before the undead find a way up. It was honestly a good idea, because we were exhausted with the idea of searching an entire city for the missing 30 after 12 hours. So, we figured we could give this a shot to streamline the process, and if we find people, then we can get information that leads us to others. Or maybe the bodies, if they didn't make it, so we can return them to their families, if we're able. So we went up a skyscraper. Taylor pulled out the radio and told the Searcher HQ to ignore the oncoming flare shot for now, and she'll update them soon. Afterwards, she placed the radio back on her hip, pulled out the flare gun, and shot it into the air with red smoke and a bright red light flying into the air. We waited for any signs of life while looking out into the city upon the rooftop we were resting on. And soon enough, we saw a very obvious SOS with a flickering light from a building far off into the city. And in no time at all, Taylor called in an extractor to come pick us up, and ignited a flare stick so the extractor wouldn't miss us. Now, I should explain what an extractor is for those who don't know. Extractors are searchers who fly bigger, customized rovers that can fit more than 4 people within them, 10 people to be exact. Since there were 6 of us currently, we'd be fine if we happened to only find 4. Though if we found any more out there, then we need to call in a second extractor on top of that. And given how we were looking for ideally 30 people, then we'd need 4 extractors for 36 people. Here's an image showcasing the general area of the dead city we went to. Once we arrived on the roof of the building we needed to be at, we went inside and searched the building, where we indeed found someone there named Alex. He was one of the Bear Corp SOs sent out with the searchers, and he told us that most of the searchers are dead, while plenty of others are missing from a series of unfortunate events where everyone's radios were broken and flares got lost along the way. Moira asked him if anybody else was left alive that he knew of that we could quickly locate, and he said that there was a person from 2 blocks up ahead, viewable from the windows, who he communicated with using the SOS signal we saw to make sure they were alive or not on a daily basis in a routine, with the other person responding in the same way. But for the past 2 days, the other person hasn't responded. Even if there's the likelihood of that other person being dead, it's worth checking out to see if they're in a jam or not. Taylor called the extractor, telling them that we found a survivor and were on our way back up, and upon getting back in the rover, we flew over to the building Alex directed us to and made our way onto the rooftop in the same manner as before, telling Alex to stay behind. We did our search routine again and began hearing noises, very clearly undead, as we descended down the stairs and eventually found the source. An apartment with its door breached open to see several undead inside. We took them out and looked around the place until we heard a door unlocked to reveal another survivor. This one named David. We asked him the same deal we asked Alex, and he said the same things Alex did. So once we all got situated, we went back to the rooftop where Alex and David finally met up. Which I'll admit, felt nice to know that our efforts brought people back together. Now, since the plan worked with nobody else to find that we knew of at the time, I asked Taylor if she had any other ideas, and she said something that searchers actually do nowadays. We could use the rover by flashing it over the city, flashing its lights in the SOS code, and see if anyone happens to respond. I mean, they're all geared with flashlights in case the worst happens, so they could return the favor and we'd direct them to head to the top of a building. I was mind blown by the concept, and everyone else was too. And we put it to good use for a while, until I saw what looked to be multiple rapidly flashing lights far down into the city. I opened my window, and immediately we all noticed it was gunshots. The gunshots were loud, loud enough to where we could hear it within the wind as we were in the air. The extractor immediately knew what to do, so he flew down close enough for us to see that it was 4 people shooting their guns in the air, trying to get our attention, while the undead was chasing them from all directions, as the survivors defended themselves in the process. And so the extractor flashed the rover's lights to acknowledge them, and flew over to a building with plenty of distance away from the scene, but not being too far, while Taylor radioed Searcher HQ to request a second extractor in the air immediately, and to wait for a flare shot. Amanda, who hadn't said anything up to this point, suddenly, the moment after the second extractor was called in, said out loud, "We just went from a simple search and rescue to a fucking human heist." I agreed. And shortly after, we landed on the roof of the building to find ourselves, with the exception of Alex and David, going down 7 flights of stairs, which eventually had us ending up at the front door to see 4 people running towards us as the undead chased from behind. We took shots at the undead, keeping the people safe as they ran in, and immediately after shut the doors and ran for our fucking lives due to the fact that there were broken windows we had no time to barricade. The undead crashed through the windows and chased us up the stairs as we were shooting down at them, finding ourselves back on the rooftop with the extractor waiting for us. Most of us got on board, while me, Cole, and Moira held them off, due to the high amount of them pouring out of the rooftop door. I told Moira to go, and she got on the rover as it started to slowly drift away from the rooftop. I remember hearing one of the searchers telling both of us to take my goddamn hand, and I noticed something quite fucked. The rover was full, and Moira was holding out her hand to grab us as she held onto it, with barely any room inside it. I immediately yelled to Cole, began running to the rover while holstering my weapons. Thank fuck for the rifle slings, by the way. Grabbed Moira's hand after making what felt like the longest jump of my life, and reached out for Cole, which he soon grabbed on right before the rover went way off the roof's edge. What I'm about to tell you next is something that I remember very, very, very fucking well. The undead tried to grab onto Cole, reaching out as far as they could with their hands, missing and falling onto the solid, dark, concrete ground with blood splattering from their bodies. And I could see the undead pouring out from plenty of buildings, running in the streets, chasing us as we flew by. I remember the emotions I felt from seeing all of that. And I hope you never have to go through something similar. I held on tight like a motherfucker, and I'm sure the other 2 were the same way. But after flying for what felt like an eternity, even though it wasn't, My grip on Moira was starting to slip, and I started to panic like any rational person would be in a fucked up situation like this. I told Moira to get the extractor over a rooftop, but given how fast I was slipping, we couldn't get to a tall skyscraper in time, so we settled for a 10-story building where I let go at a safe height, and the rover landed where everyone got out, getting prepared for what was about to turn into a fight. They headed downstairs while I opened my backpack. I pulled out my flare gun and shot it into the air. Afterward, I immediately grabbed onto my rifle and began heading downstairs, hearing gunshots, crashes, until I saw those very things in graphic detail when I made it to the 7th floor to see everyone barricading the stairs with stuff like filing cabinets, since the place was an office building, while others killed the undead by unloading bullets down the stairs. I stood in place watching the madness unfold until I began noticing everyone running away from the stairs, and Vincent yelling some sense back into me with, "Get upstairs, right fucking now!" We all went to the 8th floor, barricading it once again by throwing filing cabinets and tables down the stairs, until the undead started piling themselves on top of them to get to us, which began the bullet storm. All 12 of us, side by side, shooting into that bullet-riddled hellhole, holding the undead at bay until we heard the extractor yelling out, "Extraction's here!" Of course, like a bunch of dogs running for dinner scraps, we ran to the roof, with the undead soon following with the sounds all behind us. Upon reaching the rooftop, I heard someone say, "Searches to the right, Bear Corp SOs on the left." There were 4 Bear Corp SOs, including the one we saved from the streets, and 8 searchers. So with that, me, Cole, Alex, and another guy went into the left rover, and everyone else went into the right one, as the undead were pouring from the exit. And yes, they were that quick, for those who happen to be lucky enough to have never encountered the undead. With how our rover was a bit closer to the exit than the right one, 3 of the undead got inside ours as it was leaving the LZ. They attacked us and killed the extractor, and this whole clusterfuck resulted in the rover crashing into the city streets. To be honest with you, even with seatbelts, I am absolutely fucking shocked that me, Cole, Alex, and the other guy survived the crash. Also, I'm sorry that I'm referring to the last one as the other guy. I don't remember his name. In fact, I don't remember the names of any of the 4 we found. The rover was upside down. We were hanging from our seatbelts, and the 3 undead were finally, well, dead. And after a few seconds of being dizzy, I began noticing Cole and the other were trying to break the rover's door open, while Alex was on the ground, clearly bewildered. "Alex, get him out, goddammit!" Cole yelled out. Alex, still bewildered, got up as best he could and got me out of my seatbelt. I'll tell you, falling onto the ground in a stressful situation wakes you up even if your body doesn't want to. And I crawled up to Cole and the other guy to help them break down the door. Once we did, we were attacked by the undead, with one attacking Cole as I was in between him and the other guy at a lower height, which made the undead attacker avoid me as Cole toppled over me. I heard the undead leap over me and attack the other guy, who screamed as loud as possible, which told me that he'd be dead soon enough. I heard undead coming from my left, and I had to act quick before I was killed. So I pulled out my pistol and took out 3 undead with headshots before I got up. I killed the undead who was tearing apart the other guy, as I heard Cole screaming. And then I had to shoot down 12 others before I needed to reload and switch to my rifle to help out Cole. I noticed him tossing a corpse off of him to reveal blood coming out of his right arm. I didn't need an explanation to figure out what happened. Without a second thought, I pulled him to his feet, ran over to help Alex out of the rover, and we all bolted the fuck out of there as fast as we could. We shot whoever was in our way of whatever plan we had to make up on the spot. The plan was simple. find a skyscraper with an elevator, take it to the highest floor to get a head start, shoot a flare to get help, and barricade the area to buy ourselves time. Eventually, we made it after God only knows how long it took for us to find a building. Though it wasn't 10 minutes, that's for sure. We took the elevator with the door closing right as the undead were on our ass. Found ourselves on the 50th floor, and then ended up on the rooftop. I pulled out the flare gun and shot it up before pulling a flare stick out and igniting it to make sure they didn't miss us. "Alex, barricade the downstairs as much as you fucking can," I said to him before he and I went down. Alex went off to begin defenses while I had a different idea. I saw an emergency fire axe in its wall case, and I'm sure you know exactly where I'm going with this. To make it easy as possible, I grabbed the axe, pulled out my pistol, went back up to the rooftop where Cole was after he'd already patched up his arm, and I told him to hold his right arm out on the ground. He refused. I pointed the gun at him, saying, "It's either that or this. Which is it gonna be? 10 seconds. So he chose the axe, and without getting into detail, I hacked his arm off and helped use his belt as a tourniquet. I went downstairs after hearing gunshots. I found Alex holding off the undead by himself, which was short-lived when I showed up to help out. We held them off with precision headshots one by one for about 30 seconds before I heard Cole yell out that the extractor was here. Right as he did, the infected were nearly over our defenses, so we ran as fast as we could through the door and then up the stairs. As we were running, I heard Alex trip, and he began screaming in agony. He was dead, and there was nothing I could do to save him. I ran out onto the rooftop, saw the same rover from before with Cole and all the searchers inside it. The vehicle hovered and was ready to go as the undead were right behind me. The rover drifted away from the rooftop in a speed that was enough for me to catch up. Taylor reached out her hand to catch me as I jumped. When I did, I immediately knew there was nothing beneath my feet to land on. If it wasn't for Taylor, I'd be dead. I saw the undead jump out for me and fall 50 stories down where I couldn't see them. The dead city below us became too dark. Taylor pulled me inside the rover and didn't let go of me until Vincent closed the door. I sat down in the last empty seat and buckled my seatbelt. I let out a deep sigh before I laid my head down and closed my eyes for what I thought was a short nap. It felt like a second had passed before I woke up at Searcher HQ, and Vincent helped me out of my seat. In the end, 27 people died, and the mission was a complete clusterfuck. After Cole got the medical attention he needed, he ended up with a prosthetic once we got home. He still has it to this day. We said our farewells to the searchers and went back to Bear City to move on with our lives. A few hours later, I received a letter in the mail from Warren Bear himself. It said, "I heard what happened, and I'd like to help out by inviting you to have a drink with me where we can talk about how you're feeling. If you'd like to be alone instead, I understand. No judgment. And if you don't want me to help while out of sight, then I'd understand too. If you do accept my invitation, show this letter to the security when you make it to the top floor. Hope to see you then. If not, then I hope you live a happy life. Warren Bear." Obviously, knowing where all this ends up by now, I accepted the offer, and we both had a drink in the highest balcony on Bear Tower, and Cole was with us too. It was a beautiful sight, especially at night with a full moon and fog. So much so that there's a photo from Warren showing it off. We talked about how we were holding up, and I'm not going to get into the conversation because it was rather personal. But the point is that we got along with Warren really well. Really, really well. Where he gave me his phone number saying if we ever needed him, we could personally call him for whatever reason. And I did over these last 4 years. Warren may have the role of a leader for a massive city with a million people. But he's no different than the teddy bear he's named after when you actually get to know him. And I hope those in the city get lucky enough to be able to someday. Ultimately, this all led to both me and Cole being asked to be part of Warren's special security detail, which has lasted us for about 3 years now and still going. During this time, I even learned about how Bear Corp SOs can use a normal 4-seater rover to fly into the dead city and grab items from a certain building as a quick job, not needing any other searcher assistance. Since the incident, it's been smooth sailing, where we've never ended up in a situation like my first day ever again. And hopefully I never do as long as I live. And I wish the same for everyone involved that day. And with that, I believe I've reached the end of this report about convincing the world that optimism still exists. I gave you an introduction, the history of Bear City, and a recounting of my first day as a searcher, as a perspective for the outside world coming in to ask questions, so they can understand part of how Bear City is able to sustain itself. It may be a rough recounting, but it's not a sunshine and rainbows job, and leaving out the gritty details of what we have to do in order to sustain our city would only leave a false impression. I hope this has been a worthwhile read for you, and I wish you all the best in surviving in the new world.
Don't mind if I do.